keeping an eye on imaging. Discussion and commentary based on articles from JACC Cardiovascular Imaging.
Hello, I'm Christopher Kramer from the University of Virginia, Associate Editor of JACC Cardiovascular Imaging. And with me today is Dr. Andrew Arai from the NHLBI, who is here to discuss a paper for which he's contributed an exciting editorial about a paper involving the use of early contrast enhancement in patients after acute MI, delineating the area at risk. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit about the paper and what kinds of patients got into that particular study.
Well, this is an interesting study out of Japan. They looked at 34 patients that had recently reperfused acute myocardial infarctions, and they used MRI to look at the area at risk. What's a little bit different, most people use gadolinium images, say 8 to 15 minutes after the contrast is administered. What they looked at was images obtained about 2 to 3 minutes after administration of gadolinium. And what they realized was that that area at risk, or that zone that enhanced on those early contrast-enhanced images, was significantly larger than the ultimate infarct images. And I think this is an important observation. So it's sort of like getting two pieces of information out of one contrast injection.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I know your laboratory has made seminal observations using a different kind of imaging to delineate the area at risk. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, we've been looking at T2-weighted imaging as a way of picking up on the area at risk by MRI. And what T2-weighted imaging looks at is essentially edema or swelling of the tissue. And that swelling is associated with a small increase in water content. And that increase in water content we can image with an MRI scanner. It's one of the unique things about MRI characterization of tissue. And in fact, the Japanese group used that technique to validate this new idea of early contrast enhancement.
And why is measuring area at risk non-invasively like this in patients post-infarction important?
Well, if you really don't know how well your treatments worked unless you know how much myocardium was in jeopardy or at risk. So the area at risk gives us a measure of how much myocardium was downstream from the coronary occlusion, and then you need a separate set of images to say how much of that area at risk went on to be infarcted. If you measure both of those parameters, the difference, simple mathematical difference between the two of those measures represents myocardial salvage.
And there have been a number of interesting papers out in the last couple of years trying to tease out which is the most important prognostic indicator in patients after myocardial infarction, as demonstrated by MRI. There are, I guess, three measures. One would be final infarct size. The other would be salvaged area, as you discussed, and the third would be the area of microvascular obstruction or severe microvascular damage, capillary, no reflow zones. Which, in your opinion, is going to turn out to be the most important prognostic indicator?
Well, I think all of these indices have been shown to have prognostic value or predicting outcomes. If you want my guess in terms of which is going to be the most important, I'm still banking on the infarct size. The infarct size is the permanent damage, and the area at risk, or the myocardial salvage, really just says how bad the heart attack could have been. So if we have a successful intervention in the cath lab or with thrombolytics, you would think that what you saved shouldn't have long-term adverse consequences.
And with this paper showing this new measure of early contrast enhancement, where do you see that fitting in our armamentarium with non-invasive imaging post-MI?
Well, I think the real appeal is that it might be a lot more convenient and faster. So if you want to do T2-weighted imaging, you have to do that before giving any contrast, and you have to image the whole heart, and essentially it adds a lot of breath holds and time to the MRI exam. These early contrast-enhanced images occur shortly after the bolus of contrast we're already giving, and so there's a real convenience factor of squeezing it in that time period.
Well, I think this is a very important novel observation by this group in Japan, and I want to thank Dr. Arai for his important editorial published in JACC Cardiovascular Imaging along with this paper. Please look for it, and thank you for joining us today.